Good morning, everyone. I'm glad you chose to join me for this particular message. This is my third Advent message, and it's entitled The Word Made Flesh. And it comes from John chapter 1. We'll be looking at verses 1 through 3 and also verse 14. If you'd like to hear the entire sermon, it will be on our website, and I'd encourage you to look that up and take a look at our or listen to the entire message. Also, my notes for this sermon will be published there as well. So I encourage you to go over to our website and check that out later this Sunday, so after we've posted it. But I really am struck particularly by the first chapter of John. I believe the Gospel of John was actually written after the epistle, the first epistle or the letter of John. The reason is because many of the ideas that are shared in 1 John are repeated in this first chapter, but they're more carefully crafted in the Gospel account, which would make sense if John were writing a letter more to a friend or something like that, and then later on expanding those ideas into a full-blown explanation of the divinity and humanity of Jesus. And so that's what I see happening. And John is very concerned about something. We know at the end of the first century, when it is believed that the Gospel of John was written, and also the letters of John and the book of Revelation were all written within probably a 10 to 15 year period. And during that period of time, John is dealing with an awful lot of struggles in the early Christian community. A group of people have begun moving into the Christian community. We believe they were probably from outside originally. They were what would be called proto-Gnostics, or as they were known at the time, Docetics or Doceticism. It was a belief that because God was too holy and too perfect and too pure, he could not have become human. And so Jesus was either just an apparition where God appeared to be human, or he was simply a man who was possessed by the Spirit of Christ. And that's basically the view of Doceticism. It was a difficult and problematic belief. And John's letter and the Gospel of John are written very much to counteract this view of Jesus Christ. He wants to make it very clear that Jesus is both God and man, that he is fully God and fully human, and he doesn't want any wavering in that thought process. And that's one of the things that's dangerous for us, is to begin wavering on that doctrine. I was sharing with a group not long ago that you cannot be a Christian and deny the humanity and divinity of Jesus. If you do so, you are not a Christian. That is the defining understanding of what it means to be Christian. So the divinity and humanity of Jesus, the full divinity and full humanity of Jesus, is non-negotiable for the Christian. We don't get to choose that. We don't get to fudge on that one at all. It is clearly laid out in Scripture, and John absolutely makes it crystal clear in his first chapter of John and in his letter of 1 John. He makes this a crystal clear concept for us. It is the early Christian community in the second century celebrated the Annunciation. In fact, that was very important to them. Many of the Christians who came through the Roman culture had a distinct dislike for birthday celebrations. The reason for that is that Romans made a big deal out of birthdays, particularly of important people. They believed that at birth you kind of became human, very much like we do in our culture. But for Christians, the the moment a person became human was at conception. Conception was the point. And so the Annunciation was what the Christians in the second century celebrated, because that was, in their understanding, when God became human. And it was very, very important to them. The concept, however, was that as it went on, this idea of doceticism began to corrupt the Christian church, and they needed to focus much more closely on that. And they really picked up on a statement in John's letter. In the 5th chapter, John talks about that which comes by water and blood, and what John is implying in that passage in John chapter 5 is the birth process. And I don't know if you've been in a room where the birth process takes place, but there is blood and water. I can guarantee I've been there. So I do understand that there is blood and water. There is reality, is what John is saying there. And he says that they are witness to the humanity, and as a result, we cannot deny the humanity of who Jesus is. There was a real birth, and Jesus came into the world as human beings come into the world, through water and blood. And so Christians began to focus more on the actual birth of Christ. And Matthew and Luke both talk very much about this concept of the birth of Christ. And so they picked up on that. And that's how Christmas came to be. They actually counted from the date that they believed the Annunciation took place, because they believed it took place during Passover, the Jewish Passover. So the date they had selected was March 25th. They counted 9 months from that, and that leaves you December the 25th. And that's how we got the date of Christmas. It is that concept, or that idea, that has made its way and as it were, pushed its way into Christian thought. That's why it is so important to us as Christians. Christmas is not as important as the Incarnation, that God came as a human being, that he dwelt among us, as John says in chapter 1, that he walked among us. He would say that we, in the first letter of John, he would say, we have handled him, we have seen him, we have touched him. He is real. He is a human being. This word of life, this message that God has for humanity from the very eternity. The word logos, which is the word that John chooses to use, is a Greek word that already had loaded philosophical meaning by the time that John writes his letter and his gospel. That word had, for 600 years, had meant the concept of divine order in the universe, in philosophical thinking. It was used in that way. And by the time that John was writing, 600 years later, it had also developed a very strong sense religiously, that it was connected directly with the God who was the framer and the author and the motivator of eternity. And so for John, picking up that word, he knew it was a loaded word. And he chose it for that very reason. He uses it as a title for who Jesus is. It is very, very precise use of the language by John. He wants us to understand this, and he is basically telling the docetics and the Gnostics, the proto-Gnostics, if you will, that this message is that God did come in flesh. And for them, that was anathema. Flesh was the material world, and flesh was the creation of an evil, twisted God that had emanated from the original creator. And as a result, anything that was flesh or anything that was material could not be good. It was simply trapping what was good within it, the spirit nature within it. And John says, no, that's not the way it is. God made the material world, and then he entered that material world through Jesus Christ. John based his ideas very strongly on the Apostle Paul's writings to the Colossians and the writer of Hebrews writing in the first chapter of Hebrews, where the concept is that the creator of the world became flesh. That idea is transformative. For Christians, they understood that unless Jesus Christ was God, he did not have the power to save us. And unless he were fully human, he could not save us by taking our place. That is central to the Christian understanding of salvation. The atonement means something, and it only happens if Jesus is both fully God and fully human. That's why Christmas is so important. The date is not as important as the concept. God become flesh. The Word become flesh. The very message of God from eternity came and dwelt among us. And that is a glorious, glorious truth. Thank you for listening. God bless you. I hope you join us for church this morning.